And we have two speakers today from Save Our Schools. We really salute their missionary zeal to get things back where they belong as far as supporting public education. And Abbie Hlavacek is the Tucson Community Action Team Coordinator for Save Our Schools. She is a passionate education advocate, software engineer, and she was on the Marana Unified School Board. As a product of public schools and a mother of three, she deeply understands the importance of providing equal access to children for their education. Her experience living and organizing in the Marana area has given her a profound understanding of the unique needs of families and students in the community. She is actively involved with Save Our Schools, where she serves as a coordinator responsible for Pima County. Through her work with this organization, she actively engages with local parent groups and rural communities, ensuring every student has the necessary resources to succeed. Her dedication to education and her expertise as a software engineer allows her to bring a unique perspective to her advocacy work. So let's have a real nice, warm welcome to Abbie. Thank you. We also have with us today Kristin Roberts, a coordinator with Save Our Schools Arizona. She has been organizing public school advocates in the West Valley and North Phoenix. She believes in justice, love, and community. Originally from Detroit, Michigan, Kristin has been honored to teach in Arizona's public schools for the past 15 years. Her upbringing, faith, and experience as a teacher motivate her to continue working to build a better Arizona for future generations. She is a national board certified teacher with a master's degree in educational leadership from Arizona State University. She has been organizing her community to advocate for strong public schools since 2017. Let's give Kristin a very, very warm welcome today.
We are just thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us. My name is Kristin. I am a public school teacher in the Phoenix area and work closely with Abbie and the rest of our team across the state with Save Our Schools Arizona. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit community-based group. And we have been, Abbie, you can go to the next slide if you want. We have been organizing to fight for strong public schools because we believe and we know that strong schools lead to a strong state. And we also know that that's what every Arizona child deserves, is a great public school right there in their neighborhood. So why do we fight? You can go to the next slide, please. Like I said, we believe that every kid, regardless of where in the state they live, they deserve the very best right there in their neighborhood. Public schools really bring our community together. And we believe that's something that benefits all of us when neighbors come together. And despite our diverse views and needs, we're a community. That's what public schools offer. We provide so many wraparound services, food, transportation, community events. Still love like the Friday night lights and bringing the city out to a football game, arts, sports, lots of extracurriculars. And this isn't on the slide, but also a lot of career and technical education programs that kids can get certificates in while they're here in our public schools. We all know that public schools raise our property values, right? When we are shopping around for houses, that's something that we look at regardless of whether we've got kids in the home or not, because it matters for our investments. Great public schools help our economy. They produce a well-educated workforce, they attract businesses, and ultimately they are the best investment that we can make, as well as just a moral imperative. So we really believe strongly that our kids in our schools and our communities are worth fighting for. So that's kind of an overview of who we are. During The legislative session, we always keep track of what's going on with bills. And about a month, almost 2 months now, we passed a budget in this state. The budget did have some positives for public education, but overall, it really wasn't what we want to see. So they were able to negotiate some increase in funding for school facilities. And that's really significant because our school facilities can only be funded through certain dollars. So like upkeep of buildings. And that has been frozen for many, many years. It does sound like a lot of money, 668 million. But if you think about just your own property, like if you have a home or a car and you neglect to maintain it or you can't afford to maintain it for many, many years, when you finally get around to fixing it, there's going to be a whole bunch of problems. And so that's kind of what we're seeing in our schools. We haven't had any support for maintaining our buildings in a really long time. We're really glad that we have some of that this year, but we still need a sustainable plan going forward to be able to, give our kids safe and up-to-date learning spaces. Another good news from the budget. How many of you have heard of the aggregate expenditure limit? You can raise your hand or put something in the chat. That's come up usually every winter for the past few years. And basically what happens is the legislature budgets money to schools, gives it to schools, but has to lift this limit in order for schools to spend the money that's already been paid out to them. Thankfully, this year they overrode that limit. We don't have to go through like the political chicken game of who's going to blink first and what can they leverage and fight each other with. That's something we don't have to worry about this year. So we're really happy about that. One more good thing. Governor Ducey had implemented a results-based funding, which basically meant schools that were in better off communities financially, schools that had more resources were producing better test scores, so they got more funding, which doesn't make a lot of sense. The schools that have students who are in more need typically need more resources to be able to provide students with services. So that 68 million has been redistributed, so it will be available for all schools, regardless of the results they're producing. And ultimately, that is going to be a lot more equitable for all of Arizona's kids, especially in rural and urban communities. What we didn't see in this budget is any improvement on ESA vouchers. And Abbie will talk to you a little bit later about ESA vouchers, but they are a financial drain that robs public schools of funding and diverts it into private schools, often religious schools, that can pick and choose their students. This program was implemented just about a year ago, and it is on track to bankrupt our state. Just to fund it for the few months that it's been in place so far, I think it's been in place since October, our state had to empty the rainy day fund in this budget, so that's gone. Or I'm sorry, the surplus is gone. We're on track to empty the rainy day fund next year and actually go into the red. And that's just if things stay the same. If there's any kind of increase in this program, we're really going to be, the best analogy I can think of is using our credit card to pay the mortgage, because the state has not allotted for that. And that's something that we really called for with this budget, but unfortunately we didn't see. So that's kind of where we are in terms of this legislative session. I'd like to move forward and just dive into a little bit more about the state of education in Arizona. So Arizona currently has basically 4 main types of schools. When we talk about public schools, we include district schools and charter schools, because those are the publicly funded, publicly regulated schools. District schools are, your Tucson Unified School District, They're your neighborhood schools. Charter schools are choice schools, and they don't have as many regulations as traditional public schools. So for instance, their teachers do not have to be certified. And you don't go to a charter school based on your neighborhood. You fill out an application form. They are supposed to still meet the needs of all students, including those with disabilities, just like district schools are. It's hit or miss whether that always happens, but that is what is supposed to happen. Then we've got 5% of Arizona kids who go to private schools, and that's what ESA vouchers fund. So when Abbie tells you later these astronomical figures that we're spending on these ESA vouchers, that's going just to that little tiny orange part of that pie chart when we think of Arizona kids. Private schools do not have any academic accountability. They do not have to fingerprint their employees to have background checks. They don't have curriculum requirements, and they can pick and choose their students, and they often do, excluding those who they deem harder to educate or who they would rather not work with. And then we've got homeschool, which is 3% of Arizona kids. And if you're from back east, homeschool in Arizona looks a little bit different here. Back east, there's resources given to parents, there's curriculum, there's some kind of accountability. Here, there's nothing. If you say you're homeschooling your kids, cool, you do you, whatever that means to you, the state is good with. So I want you to remember this chart when we talk about education in Arizona. If you look at the superintendent of public instruction, Tom Horn, he talks about that little 8% there in the orange constantly. And so it sounds like that's most of Arizona kids, but it's not. Remember that blue part, the vast majority of Arizona kids are in our public schools. So what's going on with those public schools? How are they funded? You can go forward to the next slide. We have made some slight improvements with our funding. A lot of our Democratic lawmakers worked really hard to make that happen. And so did advocates across the state, parents, teachers, even students coming together to kind of turn the trajectory. But we are still currently funded, as of last year, around 47th in the nation. And while funding has gone up a little bit in Arizona, it's also gone up across the country. Things are more expensive now. So I believe we're maybe a little bit less than 47th now. But as you can see, it was not always this way. So if you are, in your late 30s, early 40s, and you went to school in Arizona back in the 90s, you had a decently funded public school. It was right around the middle, not great, but there has been a systematic decline since the late 90s in funding education, and that really corresponds with what Abbie will show you later, the movement to privatize education here. So how does that impact our kids? I'm a teacher, so I see this every day. We have the second most crowded classrooms in the United States. I think my record is 43 eighth graders in a room at once, and that was, a little bit smelly. They're 13 and it's hot outside. They tried really hard. I tried really hard, but I was simply not able to give them the type of attention that I would like to give if I had a reasonable class size of about half of that. We also have the lowest teacher pay in the nation, and that is leading towards impacting the teacher turnover that we're seeing, which, I don't know, from my lived experience, I would say is the biggest crisis that we're facing right now. Teachers are fleeing the state, or they're getting jobs in other industries. We have a lot of people who are certified to teach in Arizona, but not a lot who are willing because of the working conditions. So here's how that impacts kids. At my school, we had over 40 teachers leave last year. That's more than a third of our teachers. I work in a large urban high school. And we are replacing most of those as best as we can. We're still hiring. We've got a couple more weeks before school starts. But that means that we're going to have almost a third, well, over a third of our staff be brand new, without someone with experience to kind of guide them. That also means that many classrooms go unfilled, and often those are the positions that are the hardest to fill, and they're the most important ones. So we will be changing our model with how we provide special education services, because we can't sustain what we've done in the past. We don't have enough special education teachers. Last year, we had an unfilled position for English language learners. So kids who come to the country who are still learning English for, oh gosh, like 4 months. They didn't have a teacher. They had a different sub every day. And I know, because some days that was me. And I went into this room of really eager to learn, bright students who should be welcomed and becoming part of a community. And they were just kind of already feeling checked out because they had somebody different every single day. Our counselor to student ratio is the second worst in the nation. We've got one counselor for every 650 students. And actually, before Kathy Hoffman was the superintendent, that was a whole lot worse. We were about 1 to 900 something. We are struggling to find nurses to afford librarians and counselors and social workers. Some schools are having to shut down some of their arts and sports programs and extracurriculars. And of course, our infrastructure, right? We've got problems with our buses, our air condition, roofs needing replacements, out-of-date textbooks, a lot of problems with our facilities, and we are
She frozen? Can't hear her?
Yeah, I think so.
They were not losing the content.
I think Kristin is frozen. Could you take over, Abbie?
Yeah, so unfortunately our schools, they are definitely lacking in qualified professionals. In my own kid's elementary school, we don't have a certified registered nurse, nor do we have a librarian. We have something that's called an aide, basically. We also have a counselor, but she is a retired counselor. She left and then she came back. So when you're looking at the downstream effects of these being chronically underfunded consistently, it impacts our kids' ability to explore different interests, like different art or sports programs, or if they want to take up, learn how to be a carpenter or how to build a tiny home and things like that. This all has a downstream effect. And also as Kirsten was talking about our buildings, which is 100% true in terms of if an air conditioner fails, only at that point will an insurance company step in and say, we will fix it. Or that is when the funds become available to replace a failing air conditioner. So this typically leads school districts to ask for bonds. And depending on where you live, bonds are not either incredibly receptive, which is typically your affluent areas, or not so receptive in your rural and low income areas. So despite all of the issues that we have been seeing, our kids are doing fairly well, and especially around grades 4 through 8 in both math and reading. They are scoring in the national average. Arizona has the third best growth in grade 4 in reading, especially between the years of 2011 to 2022. Many of the public schools have received a score of A, B, or C in 2022. And that, especially around COVID, we saw several of those schools dip down into C or D. And we've seen a decrease where there's only about 2% of the Arizona public schools have received an F rating. So this is my part. So the root causes of all these challenges that we are facing is the push to privatize public education. This means that there are some people, organizations that want to defund our public schools and an attempt to convince the community that they're failing in order to make private schools seem like the better option. So in 1998, the school tuition organization tax credit was created. It was the first in the nation. Then in 2006, the legislature passed the first voucher program. In 2009, the vouchers were ruled unconstitutional by Arizona courts. But the legislature was not giving up, so it passed in 2011 the ESA vouchers as a workaround. So in 2012 to 2016, the legislature slowly expanded to the vouchers to more and more categories, so more and more families could take advantage of these ESA vouchers. And in 2017, the legislature passed a universal voucher. And in 2018, State Board of Schools of Arizona put the vouchers on the ballot. And Arizona voters rejected it nearly to a 2-to-1. So you can clearly see over the years that we have seen efforts to privatize public education in our state. It started as very small programs to move people away from publicly funded community schools into a privatized market where everyone receives a voucher so they can shop around for different options. There has been several states, surprisingly red states, that have rejected universal vouchers because it is bad policy. There's only been one other state, Iowa, that has recently implemented this program. So what exactly is a voucher and why should we be concerned? So here in Arizona, we call it an ESA, which stands for Empowerment Scholarship Account. Mainly because people just don't like the word voucher. The ESA funds are designed to provide financial support to students in private schools and homeschooling families. The previous framework for ESAs had specific categories for families to qualify. These categories were special need kiddos, kids that lived on tribal land, military families, if the parents were deaf. Also, if you lived in an area where your home school district was rated as a D or an F. The amount of money that a student can receive depends on their specific needs. With kiddos with significant special needs receiving more funding up to $50,000 or as little as $7,000, which is more the norm. The funds can be rolled over and they can also be used for university and community college tuition. The ESAs are public tax dollars that are issued by the Department of Education to parents to pay for private school, homeschooling, other options. I do want to clarify that charter schools are not funded through the voucher program. They are considered public schools. They are funded the exact same way as your district school, with some minor tweaks. It is also important to debunk this misconception that the voucher funds are exclusively for the benefit of the taxpayer receiving them. This is the infamous "the money should follow the child" stance. In reality, these funds were initially designated to fortify the Arizona education system as a whole. The average Arizona household contributes approximately about $1,100 to the state general fund for K through 12 education expenses. A little quick math here. So that's $5,900 that the taxpayer didn't pay to the state. And that is substantial funds that are being redirected away from local public schools. If you have multiple kids, let's use me as an example. I have 3 kids. I am guaranteed at a bare minimum to $21,000. And I can tell you, I paid nowhere near that amount to the state for the 2022 tax year. There's a question of, is there ever a case that Save Our School has a position on where ESA is beneficial? Absolutely, we do. We have a strong position in supporting ESA, especially with children that have an autism diagnosis. Some of that daily stimulation at a public school or really anywhere can be extremely hard on them. And this is a very specific instance where your public school may not actually be the best place to meet those needs, no matter what they do. And until we get to the point where we have great special education services, we support using ESA funds to use those dollars as they need it for their kiddos. So just exactly how much is this program costing us? The voucher program started as a $1 million pilot program in 2012. And since then, it has grown exponentially. When in 2022, when they were trying to pass it, the majority was trying to use the $33 million as the basis for passing in universal vouchers. What we're seeing for the 2023 school year is we're projecting close to about $500 million in funding. So we're just over 500 million. This program has no cap, and it will continue to grow as more students take advantage of it. For 2024, it is estimated to hit nearly $1 billion in funding. So the snafu that we are going to be running into is that we have less income revenue going into the general fund for 2024 due to the former governor's flat tax law that recently went into effect. We have to pay for this somehow. And it's going to get paid by cutting into vital services. So this doesn't just include just education, but it's going to cut into healthcare, infrastructure, water, and more. I want to bring the bird's eye view down to a more local level. You can see the consequences of these financial losses are going to be pretty far reaching when you look at these Tucson area schools. Kirsten covered a lot of the issues that she's seeing in her own school, but I want to remind you that these are these kids that you see playing soccer. These are the kids that you may not be seeing. These are the kids that are suffering from food insecurity, where they depend on their public schools to provide them breakfast and lunch. And these vouchers are cutting into that. So we're going to see class sizes increase, which inevitably will impact the individual attention and support that students receive. We don't have a teacher shortage problem. We have a teacher retention problem. And it's no wonder why, with the political climate that we see here, that's getting more and more difficult to attract new teachers. Many schools are looking to cut some of the extracurricular programs. Sunnyside is putting a bond up just so they can keep the extracurricular programs. And unfortunately, that area is not very well receptive to bonds. So this really limits the opportunities available to the students. And this is the majority of families choose public schools so their kids can explore different passions and interests. And this is just bad policy that's affecting us. There's no polite way in saying this, but this is definitely aggressive. There is no line item in the budget for this program. So, which means whatever it costs, we as taxpayers have to pay for it. There are no parameters on how much it can grow. So if it balloons up to $1 billion a year, we don't have the ability to stop it or slow it down. We are monitoring it closely because the costs are increasingly rapidly approaching over $500 million for just this year alone. One of the biggest concerns that we have is the Universal Voucher ESA program applications, for children that were already in private schools or homeschooled, which means none of these kids have ever qualified for any kind of state dollars before, meaning they've never stepped foot in public schools. This is all additional cost. For private school students, their families were already paying for their education. Now they've been given a discount program. And for homeschoolers, they were not funded by the state before. So they were never counted when we talked about how much money was needed for public education. So the program has little to no oversight or transparency.
Right.
So fraud is an obvious concern. Parents receive actual debit cards loaded with $7,000 for most kids in the expansion of the program. But again, it can go up to $40,000 to $50,000 a year with kids that have special education needs. There was absolutely zero interest from the majority party to provide academic transparency. We tried to get that through an amendment, but it just didn't happen. So it boils down that if you give people access to funds like this, you just can't hope that everyone is going to be honest and do the right thing. And it's quite literally what we saw from day one. So Kristin kind of went over some of these, but Arizona has a unique stance on universal vouchers. It's a system that has the lowest standards in the country. So private schools, in other states, private schools must have certain educational standards to receive public funding through vouchers. In Arizona, schools can operate without accreditation, which, raises concerns about the quality of education provided. Public schools are subject to state standards to ensure that the kids are getting a well-rounded education. However, under the current voucher system, schools that accept vouchers are not mandated to follow these guidelines. That leaves me as a parent kind of uncertain about the educational content that children can receive. Teacher certification is not a requirement here at schools accepting vouchers. Public school teachers must undergo rigorous training and professional development and proper certification. Whereas private schools, these voucher programs can hire educators without meeting these standards. Obviously, safety is a paramount concern in any kind of educational setting, but Arizona voucher program doesn't mandate background checks for staff working with children. So this kind of admission sparks worries about the potential risk associated with allowing individuals with questionable backgrounds to interact with students. So Arizona also does not require schools in their voucher program to participate in statewide assessments. So as a result, there's limited accountability and transparency regarding the academic performance of these schools or parents homeschooling their children, and what exactly is their impact on students' learning outcomes. Parents don't need to prove that they're actually teaching their children at home when they're homeschooling. Unlike traditional public schools, which have, they have set instructional hours, Arizona voucher program lacks those type of regulations on the number of hours that a student must spend on learning each day of the week. So this may be wonderful in terms of flexibility, and I can see how that could be incredibly appealing to parents. But it raises concerns whether, students are actually receiving an adequate education.
Okay, are you all ready for some questions?
Sure, we can go ahead.
I think I saw
Yeah.
Kirsten back too. So the way we'll work it, George Beverly, one of our board members, is going to be manning the chat room. And I'll be taking the questions that folks will be raising their hands. Just have to go down towards the bottom and click on reactions, and then also raise your hand. So we already have a question from Jim Hanley. Jim, what's your question? You can unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry, my question is, it seems that there was one more slide. Did they cover that last slide?
Well,
Or
we've
did-
got about 20 minutes left, so.
So I
yeah.
would rather,
Okay, we can cover the slide. Can you guys call up the slide again? Just always like to have time for questions.
All right. Let's see. All right, so what exactly does the ESA fund? So we've been looking to see how the ESA vouchers are being used through FOIA requests, while a majority of them are being ignored by Mr. Horn. We do know that parents are using vouchers to purchase bouncy houses and go on vacations and chicken coops and paddle boards, zoo and trampoline memberships under the guise of educational expenses. So this is definitely one of the bigger concerns with ESA vouchers, because public schools have to go through a procurement process to adopt a curriculum. And there's a committee that brings forth recommendations to the governing board with input from the public. But with vouchers, the choice of a curriculum isn't monitored like that. And that's the worry where students may not be learning the most accurate information or getting the education that they need. For example, a BECA is a curriculum which has the former president's version of history, which we all know that is not based on facts. And so this is a big issue when it comes to school choice. While it might seem like a good idea for parents to pick where their child goes to school, not all parents have the tools or the academic accolades to give the education to all these students. So I can stop here and then we can just go on to questions.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so we do have a question from Kirk Alexander. Kirk, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you, Joe. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Good. First of all, I need some clarification. Could you please explain the distinction between charter schools and private schools? And by that, I mean, how is it that charter schools aren't considered not to be private? I don't get that.
I can jump in on this one, and I'm so sorry I froze earlier. I was just talking and then my screen went blank. So thank you, Abby, for picking up where I left off. So charter schools they were originally intended to be innovative places where you try something new. And so you don't have all of the burdens and regulations that a traditional public school would have. However, within months of that idea originating, it was kind of taken sideways. And in states like Arizona, that's not exactly what happened. However, charter schools are still funded by the state on a per student basis. They do not charge tuition. So anyone can go and enroll their child in a charter school. What's different than a public school is that their curriculums are often not designed to meet a diverse, the needs of a diverse community. So for example, Basis is a really popular charter school, and they have a highly accelerated curriculum that for some students, it works fine, but for others, it's just not developmentally appropriate for most minds to learn chemistry in 7th grade. They are still funded by the state, tuition-free, public schools. However, they have less requirements, like with the curriculum and with the teacher certification. They don't have to have certified teachers either.
Well, who runs them? Who administers them?
That's a great question. And it varies by charter. So that's why we've got some charters that are really good. They set up a board with community members and parents, just like you would see in a local district school. Others are profiteering and they're run by management organizations.
How is that not private?
Because the funding is public. But you're right that it is a step in between. They're in Arizona, they're classified as public because that's how they're funded, just like a public school is. So if your public school down the street has 500 students, they get the 500 per pupil funding. If the charter school has 500 students, they get the 500 per pupil funding. One of the things that Save Our Schools has called for is greater regulation with charter schools so that we can see a more equitable education.
Okay, good question, Kirk. So we have Steve Early has a question.
Just a quick question. The charter school, can it select who it allows into the classroom? Did y'all hear that?
Did you hear the question okay?
Could you say it one more time?
In the charter school, select who they allow into their classroom?
I can share my own experience. I'm a former charter school mom. I have a special needs child, and I had an older child that was already attending a charter school. And he doesn't require any accommodations. So when I thought it would be very simple for me to have both of my children enrolled at the same school. Easy. Just drive there, drop them both off, and pick them up when they're done. So unfortunately, with my second child, who I had a diagnosis, I met with their special education team. I got pushed back for several months while my child was experiencing meltdowns that was related to his diagnosis. I felt like, due to their lack of action on doing an evaluation, as well as making sure that he can just get through the day without having a meltdown, was severely lacking. I felt like they were trying to push him out. And that was my experience. I also have several other mom friends that have medically fragile children that have attended this specific charter school, and we have shared experiences. Now, that is not to say that there are some amazing charter schools here in Arizona. I will say the ones that are profiteering, because my child would have cost them money. It would have eaten into their profits just to give them an equitable education. I didn't have the greatest experience, but that is just my experience for me. Did that answer your question?
Okay, you're okay with that, Steve? Good. Good question again. Looks like George Beverly and Mike Bryan are going to man the chat room. So if you'd like to go to the chat room and type out your question, one of those fine board members will voice it for you. So, any other questions? George, we can't hear you. No luck. Mike, you want a tag team?
Sure. Susie Anderson asked, don't some of the legislators have some ownership of some of the charter schools so that they make money off the needs of the charters? Is that a conflict of interest in your view?
You would think it's a conflict of interest, but the requirements for what technically qualifies as conflict of interest in Arizona are very loose. I'm not sure about owning charter schools, but I know that one of the now a former legislator, former Senator Paul Boyer, who he was one of the people who sponsored the bill for the vouchers, worked in a charter school that is now converting to a private school, Great Hearts. And yeah, he was able to do that while he was in the legislature. And other former legislators own what are called STOs, which is another type of voucher. And they have absolutely written bills to fatten their pocketbooks.
Yeah, just as
Okay.
inside their STOs, that's basically a school tuition organization. It's they collect tuition donations for children to attend private schools, and then cream basically 10% off the top. It's like, you know, it's a sweetheart deal, kind of.
Hello.
Andrea Kennedy asks, how is it that ESA money overrides the money needed for public schools? How is it that the ESAs are eating into the cost basis for our public schools? Why is that superior?
I can get this one too, unless you want to, Abby.
I can probably add to it.
Okay. So the way that I'll start off is that ESA vouchers and public schools are both funded from the same source, which is our state's general fund. When our state's general fund is depleted, as it's being depleted right now through the universal ESA voucher expansion, everything else that's paid for from the general fund is at risk. You might have heard Secretary of State Fontes speak recently. He's very unhappy, as is Attorney General Mays, about how the ESA vouchers took up so much room in the budget that their offices were not adequately funded this year. So it's not just public schools, it's all public services, like Abbie was saying, that are defunded by the ESA vouchers. But we know, and we know this because if you look at who's funded the lobbying and the advocacy for the privatization movement, you can see what their end game is because they're not quiet about it. We know that the billionaires who fund this lobby are very interested in the eradication of public education. And so that is their end goal. And we know that's what will be on the chopping block if they can politically get away with it. I don't know, do you want to add to that, Abbie?
No, I think you gave a very well-rounded answer to that.
Well, I've got a question. So the Arizona Supreme Court ruled in the beginning of all this that it was unconstitutional. And on what grounds was it unconstitutional? Do you remember, or does anybody know?
I don't have the history on why the Arizona Supreme Court determined that. I'm guessing how the program was defined.
Okay.
I'm guessing there were specific parameters that they found it to be unconstitutional.
And that's fair.
I do have an answer to that if you'd like.
Oh, sure, Mike, sure.
Yeah, in our Arizona Constitution, there is a prohibition on funding of private schools, and that's the basis on which they originally rejected. But the legislature went back in and sort of figured out a way to satisfy the Supreme Court that they weren't actually directly funding education with these vouchers, that they were giving money, tax rebates essentially to individual parents. And so it wasn't actually directly funding private institutions, which is a distinction without a difference in my view. And
Right.
so they ratioed their way around it quite illegitimately in my own view.
So was there a gap between the court that found it unconstitutional and the one that bought into, oh, we're funding individuals, therefore it's not unconstitutional?
Sure, there was a shift of a couple of different justices there, but I
Okay.
wouldn't say that was the reason, because our Arizona Supreme Court has for many decades now been very conservative.
Well, and let's remember that next time there's folks up for re-election to the Supreme Court of Arizona.
Yeah, one quick thing to add there too is the lobbyist behind that original voucher program that was ruled unconstitutional. One of the lobbyists is Clint Bullock, who at the time was with the Goldwater Institute and is now serving on the Arizona State Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Ooh. Boy, that's that. I guess I should have saw that one coming. So thank you for elucidating us. Okay, any other questions? We've got some time.
Yeah, it looks like Kirk Alexander put a question in the chat. He wonders if we know what percentage of schools receiving public money are actually operated by or affiliated with religious organizations. Does anybody know the answer to that?
I don't think we have that percentage offhand.
Yeah, and one of the reasons for that too is this program started the last few months of Superintendent Hoffman's tenure, and she was very transparent in where the money was going. Superintendent Horn has not been, and like Abbie mentioned, their office has been very slow to fill those Freedom of Information Act requests.
Yeah.
So we don't know. We do hear stories of religious schools that take vouchers, discriminating especially against members of the LGBTQ community, whether they're students or parents. So we know that's happening, but we don't know those numbers.
Susie Anderson wonders if there's anything the public can do to override the actions of Secretary Horn.
sort of trying to recall him, but, so this is the case of where, making our voices loud, attending the State Board of Education meetings. I believe the Department of Ed also holds meetings as well. Attend them. I believe you get a couple minutes to speak. It's worth it to spend 20 minutes out of your day to call in and have people say, hey, this voucher program is it's bad policy. His directive, even though he's like the superintendent of public instruction, he is going around the country focusing on private schools. That leaves all the rest of us, the majority of the families that go to district schools, in a really disappointed state here.
Okay, we have George has a question for us. George.
Well, a quick question, and a quick statement. Thank you both, Joe and Mike, for putting this on. Great program, and I'll invite both Kristin and Abbie to come and be a part. We are putting together a Voting Is All About You picnic in Sahuarita on October the 14th. So we want to make sure that you get invited. And anybody in DDG, if you'll mark it on your calendars, we'd love to have you come and be a part. But I'm just curious, my question for the both of you is, have any of the unions put any pressure on any of our legislators, since the unions would be a good source of activity to make sure that changes are happening in their schools?
I can speak to what I'm hearing from my local rep. So the AEA has definitely put a lot of pressure on. They are in line with our position that Save Our Schools has against ESA vouchers. We are two different organizations that are kind of striving for the betterment of strong public schools, but we do have two completely different focuses as part of the so the union, they want to make sure that their teachers are cared for. They want to make sure that teachers have health insurance. You'd be surprised about how many teachers just can't afford health insurance. So is there you want to add to that, Kristin? She's a teacher, so she can probably speak to being in the union.
Yeah, I'm a site rep and on the executive board in our local as well. And I just, everything you said is completely true. AEA, which is the Arizona Educators Association, is the majority union for most teachers in the state, has lobbied against the privatization movement, including the ESA vouchers, for many years. They did spend quite a lot of money to elect Governor Hobbs. Their PAC, I should clarify, that's not the union members' dues, but they also have a PAC and they get talked about together. But that is still something they're working on. But like Abbie said, that's one of many issues for the union, and for us, it's the issue.
Okay, great. Go ahead and put information on how we can contact you and give you support. And if we have any other questions, if you could put it in the chat room, that would be great for everybody. And let's see, George, you want to see if we can get voice to you again? Let's try that. George was the one that organized today and recruited Kristin and Abbie to come and put on a fantastic program. I'm sure everyone had a lot of questions and you received a lot of answers. George, can you hear us? Oh, okay, but you can hear us, and you did a great job organizing the program today. So let's hear it for George, let's hear it for Kristin, and let's hear it for Abbie. Good job, fantastic. We just might have to have you come back as things develop and let us know how we can help.